Claire Hastings was back in the small town of Maplewood, where time seemed to pass more slowly, and familiar faces brought a comfort she couldn't find anywhere else. It was an autumn afternoon, with the trees' leaves tinged in shades of red, orange, and yellow, painting the landscape with the serene beauty of the season. She had spent the last 6 years in New York, where she studied business administration and worked at a marketing firm. But now, back home, she felt stuck in a limbo between two completely different lives. Maplewood was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. It was no surprise, then, that Claire's return was the most talked about event in town. People greeted her warmly on the streets, asked about her life in the big city, and reminisced about the days when she was a schoolgirl full of dreams and ambitions. However, Claire felt strangely out of place. New York had given her a new perspective, but it had also distanced her from the roots she had once cherished. That evening, the town center was in celebration. The Maplewood Autumn Fair was an annual event that drew families and visitors from neighboring towns. Claire decided to go, more out of nostalgia than anything else. She wanted to smell the caramel apples, hear the children's laughter on the carousel, and remember the times when she herself ran from booth to booth, winning silly prizes in target shooting games. As she walked through the fair, absorbing the atmosphere, something caught her attention. Amidst the crowd, there was a young man she had never seen before. He stood by a show stand, observing the people around him with a distant look. There was something about him that intrigued her, perhaps the way he seemed oblivious to the buzz of the fair, or perhaps the fact that, in a town where everyone knew everyone, he was an unfamiliar face. Determined to satisfy her curiosity, Claire approached him. He was tall, with dark brown hair that fell messily over his forehead, and intense blue eyes that seemed to hold a story he wasn't willing to share. When she got closer, he noticed her presence and smiled in a friendly manner. "Hi," she said, feeling a bit embarrassed by how she had been watching him. "I'm Claire. I don't think I've seen you around here before." "Hi, Claire," he replied, his voice low and calm. "I'm Ethan. I'm new in town. Just moved here a few weeks ago." "Welcome to Maplewood," she said, trying to sound friendly. "What brought you here?" Ethan shrugged. "I needed a quiet place to start over. This place seemed perfect." "Start over?" Claire echoed, noticing the hesitation in his voice. "It's a long story," he said, glancing away for a moment before looking back at her. "But I'm liking it here so far. People are welcoming." Claire felt there was much more behind his words, but she decided not to press him. Instead, she suggested they walk through the fair together. As they strolled, they talked about simple things, the weather, the food stalls, Claire's childhood memories of the fair. Ethan seemed to open up a bit more with each step, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. There was a shadow in his eyes, a sadness he tried to disguise with occasional smiles. As they neared the Ferris wheel, Ethan suddenly stopped. "I used to love this when I was a kid," he said, looking at the flashing lights and the slowly turning chairs. "I always thought the view from up there made everything seem so small, like the problems disappeared for a while. Want to take a ride?" Claire asked, smiling at him. Ethan hesitated, but then nodded. "Why not?" They bought tickets and settled into one of the Ferris wheel's chairs. As they ascended, Claire felt a shiver of anticipation. Maplewood was stunning at night, with the fair's lights reflecting in the house windows and the sounds of music and laughter filling the air. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Claire commented, looking at the view. "Yes, it is," Ethan agreed, but Claire noticed he wasn't talking about the landscape. He was watching her intently, as if trying to memorize every detail. "There's something you're not telling me," she said, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. "You said you came here to start over. What are you running from?" Ethan looked at her for a long moment before letting out a sigh. "I'm not exactly running. I'm trying to find something. Something I lost." "And what would that be?" Claire asked gently. Ethan looked away, as if the words were stuck in his throat. Peace. Something I lost a long time ago. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken questions. Claire felt a pang of empathy for him, a desire to understand what troubled him so deeply. But at the same time, she felt drawn closer, intrigued by a mystery she couldn't unravel. When the Ferris wheel finally began to descend, Claire knew that night would only be the beginning. Ethan was an enigma, and something inside her desperately wanted to solve him. But at the same time, there was a part of her that warned her to be cautious, not to get too close to a man who clearly harbored secrets. As they walked back through the fair, Ethan reverted to being the reserved and charming young man he had been before, but Claire couldn't forget the sadness she had glimpsed in his eyes. There was something more, something he wasn't saying. And she was determined to find out what it was. That night, as they said their goodbyes, Ethan held Claire's hand a moment longer than necessary. "It was nice meeting you, Claire," he said, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I hope we can do this again." "Me too," she replied, her heart beating faster. As she watched him walk away, a small flame of hope and anxiety ignited in her chest. Ethan was different from anyone else she had ever met, and Claire knew that connection, no matter how dangerous it might be, was something she didn't want to lose. But what she didn't know yet was that that night, that unexpected encounter, would change her life forever, in ways she could never predict. The relationship between Claire and Ethan, which began with a strong attraction and moments of pure connection, was now starting to show the cracks caused by their deep differences. What was once a dance of seduction and discovery had now become a journey where each step revealed new challenges, testing the true value of their love. Claire, raised in an environment of freedom and expression, had always been encouraged to question the status quo and to fight for a better world. Her family, composed of intellectuals and activists, was deeply involved in social causes. From an early age, Claire was introduced to activism, participating in human rights campaigns, helping refugees, and advocating for minority rights. These causes were not just a part of her life, they were her essence. Claire believed that the world could be transformed through collective action, and she felt it was her duty to contribute to that change. Ethan, on the other hand, came from a family that valued tradition and conservatism. He had grown up in a religious community where norms were clear and followed without question. His upbringing had been based on traditional values, where stability, faith, and respect for authority were the pillars of life. Ethan had never engaged in political debates or social causes. For him, the world was as it should be, and any attempt to change it seemed at best unnecessary, and at worst, a threat to the balance he so cherished. As Claire and Ethan's relationship progressed, these differences began to manifest more intensely. The conversations that were once gentle and full of affection now often turned into heated debates. Ethan was bothered by the time Claire dedicated to activism, while Claire grew frustrated with Ethan's lack of interest in issues she considered vital. One day, after Claire had spent the night helping a recently arrived refugee family in the city, she returned home exhausted but satisfied. Ethan was sitting on the couch, watching the news. When Claire entered, he turned off the TV and silently watched her as she took off her coat and threw it over the chair. "Don't you think you're getting too involved in these things, Claire?" Ethan asked, his tone a mix of concern and disapproval. Claire looked at him, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "Helping people who are fleeing war, who have lost everything, that's important, Ethan." "I'm not saying it's not important," he replied, trying to stay calm. "But I think you're wearing yourself out over things that might not make much difference. There are bigger problems in the world, and I don't think the solution is as simple as you believe." These words hit Claire like a knife. To her, every small act of kindness and justice made a huge difference. "So you think what I do is useless? That I'm wasting my time?" "That's not it," Ethan said, trying to explain himself. I just think some battles can't be won. And I'm worried that you're hurting yourself by trying to fight the impossible." Claire felt the anger rising inside her. "You think it's impossible to help people?" That it's not worth trying? Ethan sighed, feeling the weight of the argument. I just think we should focus on our lives, on what we can really control. Helping the family, being together. That's what matters, Claire. Not distant causes that only bring more problems. The room was filled with an uncomfortable silence. Claire wanted to scream, cry, make Ethan understand how important this was to her. But she knew it wouldn't help. Ethan couldn't see the world as she did. To him, her vision was too idealistic, almost naive. The days that followed were tense. Arguments about politics, activism, and their differing beliefs became frequent. Ethan began to distance himself from the conversations, avoiding debates that, to him, were fruitless. Claire, on the other hand, felt increasingly lonely, as if she was losing a vital part of herself by trying to keep the relationship going. One night, after a silent dinner, Claire got up from the table and went to the bedroom. Ethan followed her, worried about what was happening between them. He found her sitting on the bed, looking at a picture of them together, taken in the early days of their relationship when everything seemed so simple. Claire, can we talk? Ethan asked, his voice full of uncertainty. She lifted her eyes to him, her eyes filled with pain. What happened to us, Ethan? Why are we like this? Ethan sat down beside her, taking her hand in his. I don't know, Claire. I just know that I love you, and I don't want to lose you. But you don't understand what's important to me, she replied, her voice trembling. And it hurts. It hurts to see that the person I love doesn't share the same values, the same dreams. Ethan sighed, squeezing her hand. I understand you, Claire, more than you realize. But we have to find a middle ground. I can't change who I am, just as you can't change who you are. But we need to learn to accept our differences, or this will never work. Ethan's words made sense, but they brought no comfort to Claire. She knew she was at a critical point in the relationship, where something would have to change, or everything would fall apart. Their love was strong, but would it be enough to overcome these deep divisions? The days passed, and Claire became even more involved in her social projects, almost as a way to compensate for the frustration she felt in her relationship. Ethan, on the other hand, buried himself in work, trying to avoid conflicts at home. The distance between them grew, and both felt they were losing something precious, but neither knew how to retrieve what they once had. The breaking point finally came when Claire organized a major campaign to raise funds for a humanitarian cause. She spent weeks planning, involving friends, family, and even some of Ethan's contacts. On the night of the event, she was radiant, believing she was doing something significant. But Ethan, who had been reluctant to participate from the beginning, showed up only at the end, with a distant and tired look. When Claire confronted him, asking why he wasn't supporting her, Ethan finally exploded. Because I don't believe in these things, Claire. I don't believe that changing the world is possible. And I can't keep pretending that I agree with all of this. Those words were the last straw for Claire. She realized she was in a relationship where her core values were completely different from Ethan's. The love they felt for each other was no longer enough to overcome the barriers that separated them. The silence that followed Ethan's outburst was deafening. Both knew they had reached a point of no return. Claire, with a heavy heart, wondered if she had the strength to continue in a relationship where she couldn't be herself. As Ethan watched her in silence, both knew that the relationship they had once cherished was falling apart. The question that remained was, could love survive these divisions, or were they destined to go their separate ways? This doubt hung in the air, creating an almost palpable tension. The answer, however, was far from clear. The days of tension between Claire and Ethan accumulated like dark clouds, threatening a storm that both feared to face. At first, Claire believed that Ethan's reluctance to open up about certain topics, especially politics and social issues, was simply a matter of personality. But as his silence prolonged and the emotional distance between them grew, she began to suspect there was something deeper, something dark that he was hiding. One night, while Ethan was in the shower, Claire, taken by a mix of worry and curiosity, decided to organize the apartment to try to ease the tension. As she moved a pile of books on the shelf, she found an old, worn envelope. Inside, there was a series of photographs and military medals. These images were not just of any veteran, they were of Ethan, dressed in combat uniform, in places that seemed both distant and desolate. The initial shock of seeing Ethan in such situations was quickly replaced by a tightening in her chest. She had always known that Ethan was reserved about his past, but she had never imagined that he was hiding such a significant and painful chapter of his life. The man she knew as quiet and serene had faced horrors that most people could never comprehend. When Ethan came out of the bathroom, Claire was sitting on the couch, holding one of the photographs. The sound of his footsteps faltered when he saw what she had in her hands. For a moment, his eyes revealed a deep fear, almost as if he were facing an invisible enemy. Claire, sensing his vulnerability, stood up slowly and walked over to him, extending the photograph. "Ethan, why didn't you ever tell me about this?" Her voice was soft but laden with concern and sadness. Ethan hesitated, his eyes avoiding hers. "I didn't want you to see me differently. The war, it changes people. It's not something I'm proud of. I did things, saw things, that still haunt me." Claire felt a wave of compassion and pain. "This explains so much. Your reserve, your silence about certain things. I understand now. But, Ethan, you don't have to carry this burden alone. I'm here for you, but, you have to let me in." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration mixed with relief. "I wanted to protect you from this. Protect you from me." His words reflected a deep internal conflict. He had always known that loving someone meant sharing the darkest parts of himself, but the fear of being rejected or of overwhelming Claire kept him silent. For him, it was easier to bear the pain alone than to risk losing the woman he loved. But now, the truth was there, raw and unfiltered, between them. And the question hanging in the air was whether Claire was ready to accept this new reality. The weeks that followed were a test of resilience for both of them. Ethan, now that his secret was out, began to have more frequent nightmares. The memories of the war, which he had suppressed for so long, started to emerge with more intensity. Claire, on the other hand, was determined to support him, but she also struggled with her own fears. She loved Ethan, but she couldn't deny that the weight of his trauma scared her. She questioned whether she could be strong enough to help him carry this burden without losing herself in the process. One night, as Ethan slept restlessly, Claire sat beside the bed, watching him. The words of the therapist she had consulted echoed in her mind: trauma doesn't disappear, but it can be managed with time, patience, and support. But you have to decide if you're willing to take this journey with him. Claire knew that the decision she made now would shape their future. She loved Ethan, but loving someone with such deep wounds meant giving up many things, including the lightness and simplicity she had always imagined for her life. However, as she watched Ethan's contorted face as he battled his inner demons, she realized she couldn't abandon him. Not now. Not when he needed her the most. When morning finally arrived, and the sunlight began to seep through the window, Claire decided she would make the difficult but necessary decision to face the uncertain future with Ethan. She knew the journey ahead would be arduous, but she believed their love could survive, as long as they were together. "Ethan," she whispered, gently holding his hand. "We will get through this. Together. I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, as he slowly woke and met her eyes full of determination, Ethan knew that for the first time in a long while, he was not alone. The path ahead would be long and full of challenges, but together, perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a new form of happiness. The revelation of Ethan's secret, the one he had buried so deeply, reverberated like thunder in his relationship with Claire. The impact was immediate and devastating. Ethan, always so confident and determined, now found himself wrapped in a shroud of doubt. He believed that by opening his heart, he could finally free himself from the demons that haunted him. But instead, the truth only made him question whether he was worthy of Claire's love. In the days following the revelation, Ethan began to distance himself. He avoided looking Claire in the eyes, fearing to see the judgment he was imposing on himself. Every conversation between them became laden with an uncomfortable silence, where the unspoken words weighed more than any confession. Ethan's easy smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of pain and regret. Claire, on the other hand, felt lost. She loved Ethan deeply, but she didn't know how to handle the new truths that had emerged. How could she support him without losing herself? Doubt gnawed at her thoughts, and she found herself questioning whether love was enough to overcome the shadows now hovering over them. In search of clarity, Claire began spending more time with her family and friends. They were her safe haven, those who knew her better than anyone else. But at the same time, she feared that Ethan's distancing was the beginning of the end. Her mind was filled with questions. Was he pulling away to protect her or to prepare for a farewell? As Claire surrounded herself with her inner circle, Ethan found himself in a state of growing unrest. Civilian life, which once seemed like a refuge, was now becoming unbearable. He began to consider returning to military service, believing that there he could find purpose again. After all, on the battlefield, everything was black and white, without the weight of emotions that now paralyzed him. The tension between them grew day by day. Ethan, absorbed in his own thoughts, started frequenting bars and parks alone, seeking to find some answer at the bottom of a glass or in the silence of nature. Claire, on the other hand, immersed herself in books and conversations with her friends, desperately trying to understand how the man she loved could be so distant. One day, while Ethan was out, Claire found his old military uniform stored in a box in the closet. The rough fabric and the medals of bravery still shone, reminding her of the courageous man Ethan was. But at the same time, they symbolized the past he couldn't leave behind. Holding the uniform in her hands, Claire felt a wave of sadness and anger. Why wasn't there love enough to overcome all of this? When Ethan finally returned home, the silence between them was almost palpable. Claire tried to start a conversation, but the words died in her throat. Sensing her anguish, Ethan finally decided to speak. "Claire," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I don't know if I can be the man you deserve. Maybe going back to the army is the best thing for me, and for you." Ethan's words hit Claire like a blow. She knew he was serious, but she also knew that if he left, there might be no turning back. The fear of losing him forever began to take hold of her. "That's not what I want, Ethan," Claire responded, trying to control the emotion in her voice. "I love you, and I'm willing to fight for us, but I need you to be with me in this fight." Ethan looked at her, his blue eyes filled with pain and regret. "I know, Claire. But I don't want to drag you down with me. You deserve more than this." The two remained silent for a long moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The love they felt for each other was undeniable, but now it seemed that it wasn't enough. Doubt and fear began to overshadow what once was a bright certainty. In the days that followed, the distance between them only grew. Ethan, determined to make a decision, began making preparations to re-enlist, while Claire increasingly turned to her family, seeking comfort and clarity. Uncertainty hung over them like a dark cloud, and both knew they were on the brink of a crossroads. What once seemed like an invincible love was now in danger of disintegrating, and the future they had envisioned together was hanging by a thread. The fate of Claire and Ethan was at stake, and only time would tell if the love they shared would be strong enough to survive the storms that now threatened to destroy it. The air was thick with tension as Claire and Ethan sat facing each other in the small apartment that had witnessed so many moments of uncertainty and passion. The silence between them was almost palpable, filled with everything that needed to be said and all the unspoken words weighing on their hearts. Claire knew she was standing at a crossroads, where her choices could define the course of their lives forever. Claire looked into Ethan's eyes, searching for some sign that he was willing to fight for their relationship. "Ethan, I love you. But I can't go on if you keep shutting yourself off. I need to know that we're in this together, that you're willing to work for us just as much as I am." Ethan was silent for a moment, his mind swirling with the ghosts of the past that still haunted him. He knew he had hurt Claire by isolating himself, by letting his fears and insecurities dictate his actions. But as he looked at her, he realized how much he loved her, how much he needed her in his life. She had been the light amidst the darkness he carried, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. "Claire," Ethan began, his voice low but full of emotion. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've let my past control us. But I don't want to lose you. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove to you that we can have a future together." Claire felt a wave of relief mixed with caution. Ethan's words were sincere, but she knew that words alone wouldn't be enough. "I believe you, Ethan. But we need to work on this together. I need to know that when things get tough, you won't run away. That we'll face everything as a team." Ethan nodded, determined. "I won't run, Claire. I promise I'll fight for us, one day at a time." With this promise, they both felt a renewal of hope. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that they would still face challenges and uncertainties. But they were willing to face it all together. They decided to start this new chapter of their lives with honesty and commitment, leaving behind the fears that had once kept them apart. The days that followed were full of changes. Ethan began seeking professional help to deal with the traumas of his past, while Claire supported him, offering patience and unconditional love. Gradually, they began to rebuild their relationship, now on a stronger foundation, where both felt seen, heard, and loved. As time passed, they realized that despite the obstacles, they were closer than ever. Each small step forward was a victory, and each challenge overcome strengthened the bond between them. One morning, as she woke up next to Ethan, Claire felt a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Looking to the future, she knew she had made the right choice by fighting for this love. Ethan, in turn, felt deep gratitude for having found in Claire a partner willing to face the world by his side. And so, Claire and Ethan began a new chapter in their lives, where love and trust were the foundation of everything. Although they still had much to learn and grow, they were ready to face whatever came, knowing that together, they could overcome anything. As they walked hand in hand towards the future, they knew they had found something rare and precious, a love that not only survived challenges but flourished despite them, making them stronger and more united than ever before.